Let's move right into, if we're ready, Louise, to our JJI's latest accomplishment. What we have is a video of State Representative Carol Ammons and Illinois State Senator Robert Peters on the Senate Bill 64, which Governor Pritzker just signed into law about the new restorative justice bill. Okay.
I wanted to ask, and we can start with you, Representative. What was it that drew you towards expanding restorative justice?
I've been actually working here in Champaign-Urbana with a few professors for probably over a decade, attempting to implement restorative justice. At this level, we were doing it in the school system because so many students were entering the juvenile justice system from the schools. Several of our professors who work on this area in research said we really need to do something to stop that pipeline. So the school to prison pipeline is a real thing. And we saw that happening over and over again. The cycle was just actually ramping up. Once you put RSOs into the school, it really ramped up the punishment kind of philosophy when it came to juveniles. And so when when Chief Justice Ammons, who I serve with on the Supreme Court Commission for Pretrial Services, he mentioned to me that they were working on this legislative measure in Cook County and wanted to see if I would be interested. And then you all reached out to me. It was certainly right in line with all of the work that we had done before. For me, it is a dramatic shift when you can use restorative justice practices as opposed to the punitive justice system that harms not just the youth, but harms the entire family and ultimately the entire community when you don't get to the cause, right? And so this practice and this bill and now this law really allows us to expand what we see as best practices for restorative justice, bringing in the injured and the person who has caused the injury, and allowing them to come up with a compassionate response as opposed to the just lock them all up and throw them away. That was why I just said, when I saw this opportunity, I'm 100% on board.
Yeah, Senator, what was it that really drew you draws you towards working on restorative justice and expanding its use?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a variety of reasons that draw me, some on the sort of macro broad level, some on a little bit of a community level, and the other one on a personal level. So I think on the macro level, I'll just say this. We have seen how we've done public safety for the last 40 years, constantly throwing the hammer at it, trying to puff up our chest, and it's caused to mass incarceration. It's really destroyed communities. It's been combined with disinvestment. And what we know is that under our current criminal legal system, it hasn't technically produced the results of public safety that I think everybody everywhere wants. And the way we do our criminal legal system is particularly unique to who we are as a country right now. But I believe that we can, in fact, be better than that. I believe that we can make a choice to actually invest in people. And one way to do that is by making sure that someone who has survived harm is able to be made whole and not being used simply to lever the hammer of criminalization against people. And then that person who contributed harm also has the ability to be made whole in their life. We often say trauma begets more trauma. And we see that happen over and over again. And so with a process that has consent, trust, faith, and investment in it, such as most restorative justice practices do, we can transition away from what has been a failed tough on crime, law and order, almost TV tabloid driven process to something that's holistic, inviting, and appreciative of the fact that there is pain that exists in our world and it begets more pain. That's on the macro level. Then on the sort of more community level side of things, it's the fact that oftentimes, in many situations, a lot of pain is coming from someone you know. And there's a whole bunch of impacts that happen, whether it's a friend or a family member that exists. And completely ignoring that and missing that, I think is dangerous. And you often see people who've survived pain or violence not feel like they've actually been made whole by the criminal legal system, and they've seen people that they love and care about completely disappear from their life, someone that they might need or they have to rely on in life. And so for me, expanding restorative justice both gets at sort of tearing down a system that hasn't kept us safe. It's about investing in people. It's helping make sure that communities feel like they can connect and trust in each other, that on an individual level, if we can trust each other, we can trust each other on a broader societal level. And then the other part is I've had to sit in, I come from community organizing, so I've had to sit in on restorative justice practices. Part of when I was one of the folks in the End Money Bond Coalition, and what helped us strengthen our coalition was that we had a lot of internal issues that were long-standing, stuff that existed before my time. And we did multiple healing circles and had multiple conversations where we talked through what was that pain and trauma, and it made us stronger. And it made us so strong that we were able to end money bond in Illinois. And a good reason for that comes from the fact that we did that healing circle. And so I know the work of things like circles and ciphers. I know that I think it's Judge Navarro who's done a lot of work in the restorative justice courts in Cook County, and Judge Evans has worked on this. And I think that if we can expand restorative justice, get faith from the court system, get faith from the public, and have it be led and driven by people who've been impacted and harmed or hurt, who feel like this is one pathway for them to be made whole, that's something that we should invest in and continue to push for and continue to drive for us to truly accomplish what it means to have public safety in every zip code throughout the state of Illinois.
Senator, I'm glad that you kind of brought that up, because you and the representative, you represent two very different parts of the state. With Chicago and the Champaign-Urbana area. And Representative, do you have experience with the use of restorative justice in your community? And does your prosecutor support the use of restorative justice?
Let me just say this. Let me start from the inside. I think Senator Peters was going from personal experience as well. We in my home call it family circles, right? We actually use a restorative process in my home life. We try to use a restorative process in my professional life, meaning in my office, there's a issue we want to address. We sit down, we discuss that, we try to find resolution, and we want to restore, right? We're not trying to harm. In my activist life in this community, I ran a group called Champaign-Urbana Citizens for Peace and Justice for almost 2 decades. And we use that same model because anytime you're working in concert with others, injuries will occur. And you don't intend to injure someone because you're so passionate about the work that you're doing. So the restorative process allows the work to continue without personal problems interrupting that work. And so I've seen the value of the restorative process in my family life. I've seen the value in my community life. I see it in my political life, because if you don't have a method to address injuries and difficulties when they arise, then you lose your momentum and you lose your movement. That happened in the civil rights movement, that happened in the Black Power movement, that happens in movement when people, human beings, who are themselves injured in many cases, because we all grew up in America, and we all have personal conflicts that can arise and derail the work. So we've used this as a part and parcel to my organizing work for almost 2 decades. I also want to say that my state's attorney is not necessarily a reform-minded state's attorney, in the sense that I see reform in the value of a restorative process. We fought hard here to get restorative practices in our schools. I mean, it wasn't a no-brainer like, yeah, we should use this because we can teach children how to interact without abusing each other, right? We didn't see that as a easy win. We had to fight for that. And so in our court system, no, we don't have a restorative minded state's attorney and a reform minded state's attorney that wants to roll back mass incarceration and allow human beings to restore collectively together. And I'll share this because this just came to me yesterday. You guys may remember or may have heard that after the uprisings that happened last June across the state of Illinois, like across the nation and across the world, there were young people who were organizing in the street. They were very upset about the death of George Floyd and the continued killings that were happening across our country. In this article that I got from one of my local press, it's a local paper called The Public Eye. The cover of it is called Unequal Justice. And there's a young man who is featured in here who has been incarcerated for over a year for sending out a message on Facebook trying to tell people to come and organize at the local mall. Well, as a result of that, some folks damaged property and just like we saw all over this as a reactionary response to the killing of George Floyd and the continued police violence. But this is the most important part of this. This man is very young. He's like 20 years old. And he sent out this Facebook message. They sent his case from the state's attorney here to a federal crime that they're charging this young man with. And they're proposing to give him 5 years in federal prison for sending out that message, which they attribute all of the damage to this young man's Facebook post. Now, compare that to what we're seeing from January 6th, where some people who literally injured and entered the US Capitol as insurrectionists, they're getting maybe 27 months or probation. So this young African-American man who had no criminal history prior, but some juvenile cases, they're going to throw the book at him for posting a Facebook message in response to the murder and the continued murder of young Black and brown people in our country and in our state, and throw the book at him and let these folks off the hook that are largely Caucasian who enter the US Capitol and attempts to overthrow the US Capitol. And they may get 27 to 32 months in federal prison. That is unequal justice. And so for us, restorative justice practices would have brought this young man and all of the young people together who did come to the mall, who may have caused damage, to look at what has caused this uprising. Just like every other uprising in the United States, our governmental response is usually throw the book at those people who did it because that was terrible. It was terrible. It was terrible. Yes, it was terrible of a response, but it's a reaction to a greater cause, and we never deal with the cause. And that's what restorative justice is designed to do. It's designed to get at the cause as to why this has happened. Why have you done this? Why did you steal that bread? Why did you have that fight? Right? We're trying to get to the why so we can restore people in their humanity and their dignity and teach them why these are not proper responses, as opposed to literally destroying not only this young man's lives, but so many other young people's lives across our state with these harsh penalties that we see coming out of our courts every single day.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. And it is a big reason why a lot of victims advocacy organizations and gender-based violence advocacy organizations supported SB 64, because in the punitive justice system, there's not necessarily resolution for victims, for people who, so for these business owners, right? Like, what do they get from this kid getting a 5-year prison sentence? They don't get any sort of closure. They don't get any sort of understanding of like what happened. And
right.
Yeah, and those who committed the committed the damage. They don't like, there's no understanding of like, okay, well, in committing the damage, this was what happened. This is the harm that you caused to these business owners, right? There's no sense of like of healing. There's no conversation in terms of what led to the reaction. Robert, go ahead.
I mean, the best way to put this about when you go so heavily on the carceral side of things or the incarceration side of things is one of the easiest things to do to make it look useless is to say, then what? So let's say you're like, okay, I caught this kid and we're going to lock up this kid and then we're going to make their parent held accountable. Well, then the best answer back to that is, and then what? Like, what do you think that's going to do? Because I will tell you, going to just make things worse for everybody. Like, I don't know how that, you think you're getting some restitution or whatever out of that, and guess what? You're just making it worse. When people go down that path, they are literally making it worse for everybody. They make it worse for themselves. They make it worse for that family. They make it worse for the community. They make it worse for the state. So the easiest question to ask when someone goes down that path, and there is, especially if someone's in politics, because at the end of the day, you know that they're making the easiest political decision ever. It's not even that hard of a political decision to try to go down that route. What's hard is to answer the then what. What do they think that will do? And my favorite part about it every time, Luis, is that they don't have an answer. They don't think, they know it won't do anything. Because the best thing to do this is you can say, we've been doing that for 4 decades at minimum. And what has it done? And if you don't see that, then maybe you don't actually care about public safety. Some of us care about making everybody safe. If you live in South Shore, you should have the same safety as someone who lives in the North Shore, right? Like there's a whole bunch of things that go into that. And what we know is that we do have some form of, we have a divide in how the criminal legal system is administered amongst race, class, and gender. That is very clear. And so it's the easiest one. The then what answer for someone who is poor, Black, and particularly a woman is very different than the then what answer if someone is a white man with a lot of money. And I think when we think about that, we have to sit in that tension and we have to say to ourselves, what are we going to do? So throwing the book at somebody doesn't make anybody whole. It destabilizes the community, and it is an excuse. And to be honest with you, I find it politically cowardice because people want to be safe. That is a fact. Nobody walks down the street saying, I would rather not be safe right now. And the question is, what we're doing to make people safe working? And the answer is no. So we must do something different. And the way to do something different is expanding things like restorative justice practices, giving people the idea that they can trust each other. Because if you trust each other and you build a relationship with each other and you see each other as being part of a community, you're more likely to be a safe actor in that position, and you're going to look out for each other. And so at the end of the day, what we need in this world is more faith, trust, and a sense of community than ever before. And this idea that we will individually solve things at individual levels, in fact, has systemic and serious problems that's not working for anybody. So done with my rant, but it's just it's a thing that it just hits me every time because it's the easiest question to ask, then what? Because then you watch people, their face has to come up. Yeah, it's a bunch of reasons that they try to come in their head. They think, well, if you do that, they're going to stop. And I go, well, we've been doing that. What do you, I mean, mandatory minimums, that didn't work. You know, truth in sentencing, that's not working. Locking up someone pre-trial, that's not working. Maybe that's not the right place to put that investment in time and energy, but I digress.
That's right. Well, and it's ignoring the cycle, right? Of like hurt people. And, you know, all you're doing is just perpetuating the cycle, right? You keep causing harm without addressing the cause. And all you're doing is just feeding the carceral state.
And I want to point out, I don't think it's a radical statement. If anything, it is the most practical path to public safety. The radical statement is to keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. I'm not elected to be in the seat to keep doing the same thing and watch it not work. The practical thing to do is to say it's not working. We need to change it. And there's actually a pathway to be able to improve it. And we need to give it time and energy and investment to make it happen. We can't just try to do shortcuts or do the politically convenient thing. We have to do what is right and work at it. So, okay, I'm done.
Well, so this is actually a good place to pivot. So another bill that Senator Peters, who sponsored, and Representative Ammons, who supported, was just signed into law and received a lot of national attention, which created a presumption against admissibility of statements made by juveniles that were gained through police deception. And it's helped draw attention to the deceptive tactics that police departments routinely use. And the number of false confession settlements in Chicago highlight this issue. So Illinois has a law, which JJI advocated for, requiring a lawyer for all children under the age 15 questioned by police in murder and sex cases. And California requires that all children consult with a lawyer prior to waiving their Miranda rights. Do you think that there's a possibility of going even further to protect children by requiring a lawyer in all cases where children are questioned by police?
I think the premise of the Sixth Amendment, thank you. my brain went, but the very premise of the Sixth Amendment, and I don't pretend to be a constitutional lawyer at all, but I can read really, really well. That premise says that the person who's accused is literally has the right to be represented by a lawyer before you say anything. What has happened is, and we've seen this in Champaign, and I know I've seen it all throughout the state, is juveniles are, unfortunately, before Senator Peters' bill, before the governor signed it, it was legal for them to lie to them, to manipulate them, to in some way use techniques and tactics on them, to force confessions out of them for crimes that they may or may not have committed. I don't even know a society that calls itself civilized that would think that that was a good thing to do to children. And so this is just, again, to highlight how, as Senator Peters said, if we continue to do the same thing over and over again, exactly who's benefiting? Now, we can look at the prison profiteers and say, oh, well, they're benefiting. We can find the benefactors in this system, but it does not create public safety. It does not guarantee people's constitutional rights and provisions are protected. It does just the opposite of that. And that bill, when I shared that with a group last week after the governor had signed it, and people looked at me baffled that this was real, that this was like, yeah, this is a real thing, that the police can lie to your children and get them to confess to things that they may or may not have done. Any society that does that needs to be reformed. And so in this case, I'm so happy to have supported the bill in the House side, but definitely that Senator Peters took the charge of that in the Senate and made sure that it was passed and that the governor signed it. Because if we don't protect the most vulnerable, and in a society where their parents don't make enough money to feed them every day, right? You're going to create something as a result of this, right? If you put thorns on their sides, it's going to pinch. And so we see this over and over and over again with these draconian policies that takes away your constitutional rights as a citizen. Young people deserve to have appropriate representation, not just somebody you sent up in there, but someone who's going to protect their Sixth Amendment right, protect them when it comes to bail questions, and make sure that they don't self-incriminate. That's supposed to be guaranteed in the Constitution. Yet we don't see that playing out in the day-to-day. And I think that, again, this is a bill that represents forethought and represents true equity and justice when it comes to the criminal legal system.
So I think like the idea of having representation and the right to representation, is, I'll say this, I grew up with a civil rights lawyer for a dad. And so I had the privilege of having a dad who was a criminal defense attorney and a civil rights lawyer. And having had my fair share of being picked up by the police as a youth, there were benefits to that. One part was I knew when I could or could not say something, and I had the ability to call my dad. And I understand that, privilege, and but with that privilege gave me a lesson that taught me how important it is that when someone of authority, particularly an adult, pulls you to the side and starts yelling at you and scaring the crap out of you, that I knew I could be like, you can't do that, or you can, but it ain't gonna work. And here's some words that's gonna scare you. I'm gonna call my lawyer, and you're not gonna expect that from a young person. And I think the idea that if you having the right to counsel, having the right to a lawyer, I think is just vitally important. And I think that this comes down to look at how we spend money. Look at public defenders' offices compared to state's attorney's offices and sheriff's departments. It's ridiculous. And look at the contradiction of people who say that they're upset and they hate the state and they hate big government, but how they're completely okay with the idea of one side of the state being able to, be able to practice with some regularity, where another side of the state, the public defender's office, can't. You can't have it both ways. If you can go after someone in the criminal legal system, you should be able to have a defense, and the judge should be able to be a neutral participant to practice the law. That a little bit of that is, you got to be grounded. It's a lot more complicated than that. But the very idea that you will be able to have defense and protection and right to counsel is at least bare minimum something that doesn't need to require whether you believe it's going to be a completely neutral process. I think I think that's totally fair and something that needs to be done. And I think everybody should know, because, I think Rep. Ammons is right. There are constitutional, there are laws that exist, but as we know, some people are allowed to break the law or not follow it, and they have the power to get away with it, and some people don't. And the one way to bring that balance is by having another person who can represent some authority to speak back against it. And when you're a kid, you're not particularly known for being an authority figure in society, and so that's a problem. Bring that authority to look out for their interest, and being able to have those two dynamics between the state in terms of the attorney and the state in terms of a public defender is not just a tool in terms of criminal legal, but also a tool of protection.
And if I can add to Senator Peters, Luis, it's a great example, and we have unfortunately too many examples, right? The Central Park 5 story tells us very clearly why we have to make the changes that we're talking about today. When I saw the interview that Yusuf Salaam did in the documentary Netflix release called When They See Us, that story, which I had already read about the story, that story really puts the exclamation point on the point that we're making here, that you can't utilize the authorities to abuse and deny young people their actual civil rights. That is what happened in Central Park 5, and I can go even further back if we had more time. But the reality is, the young woman who was injured in Central Park, she deserved to know really who did what they did, and it took too many years for that truth to come out to her. And the young men who were rounded up, who just happened to be in the park, right? But who hadn't harmed a single person in the park, who were just juveniles, who were young, who were just hanging out, they lost. They were harmed irreparably. There's not enough money that you can give to them to give them back and to repair the harm that was done to them in the criminal legal system. And no one in the criminal legal system was held accountable for the loss of life and the harm that came to the Central Park 5. And so for us, we must, and I am 100% dedicated to reversing the white racist policies and white supremacy in the criminal legal system. We know where it comes from. We know its origins. We know it comes out of fear. We know it comes out of historical race baiting. We know what it does. And it exists in the police department. It exists in the prosecutor's office. It exists in the public defender's office. But we want to root it out so that people are truly able to exercise their constitutional rights, not just some, not just those who have money or those who may have a resource that they could call upon. Every single child that is in my school system who may come across that SRO, they deserve the same thing that every other child has who can call a friend, a lawyer. When we were growing up, I didn't know no lawyers. I ain't know one. So if I had got in trouble, I would have just been in trouble, right? I didn't know anybody. So we shouldn't lean on personal relationships. That's why we're here to correct the harm in the law so that that does not exercise itself differently based on your socioeconomic standards and conditions.
Well, I think that's a good place to end it.
Thank you.
Representative, Senator, I want to thank you both so much for this conversation. And thank you for your continued advocacy on behalf of children and young people who continue to find themselves in conflict with the law. The state is lucky to have you in the legislature representing them. Thank you both so much.
Thank you for doing it, and be blessed, and see you later, Senator Peters.
See you later, Representative. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye. Here, I hope that you have learned something and enjoyed something. And I just want to take the last few minutes of this to say that since I have been part of the JJI board, I don't think that I have ever once disagreed with Elizabeth Clark about anything. So mark this down. Today is a red letter day. I am going to disagree with her. I am going to acknowledge her in front of all of you. There would be no JJI without Elizabeth Clark. I am going to honor her and to say that she has been a leader for me and for hundreds of other people that I know. She has kept us organized. She has worked tirelessly. And I want to acknowledge her tonight and ask you all to acknowledge her with me. Elizabeth, as some of you may know, has stepped down as the director of the Juvenile Justice Initiative, and Louise Klein is going to be following in her shoes. Our prayers need to go with Luis because he's got some awful big shoes to fill, and he knows it. But I could not end this evening without personally, professionally, and publicly saying to Elizabeth Clark, one of my heroes, someone that I have always admired and would hope to have the courage and conviction that she does. Thank you so much for over 20 years of hard work when other people were like, could not even imagine what you have imagined. And not only what you have imagined, but what you have actually brought into the real world and life. So I applaud you this evening. I know you're angry and embarrassed. I really don't care. I love you, and I'm sure that everybody else on this call agrees with me about this one, Betsy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Herschella. I just, everybody, keep the work going. I'm certainly not going away. I'm going to be a thorn in Luisa's side, unfortunately, and Herschella right with you right along. And I've had the most wonderful board. For those board members on here, Herschella David, who's been here from the beginning, Sheila Murphy, new board member, the new Father Brady on, Veronica Williams, my God, Veronica, you've been amazing. Mike Rodriguez, former chair, Scott Main, Amy Campanelli, I know was on.
David Reed.
David Reed from the very beginning, Patrick Keenan Devlin on, despite the fact that a tree fell on his car this morning.
Oh,
Kiana King, who has worked for us over and over and over again, Kiana. Just all of you, you're the most amazing community. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
so, and with that, then let me just say, you know, this work does require your support, your both emotional, intellectual, and spiritual support, but it also requires financial support. And if you would, you know, think about it. Whatever you can give is going to go to forward this work. You know, if you donate only what you would have paid for parking if you had come downtown, if you donate what you would have spent in drinks, you know, for some of you, that could be a goodly sum. But for most of us, it would be, you know, something that you could donate. So the auction is open until 7:30. Please, thank you again for your contributing support in JJI's efforts. I hope that you have enjoyed the evening. I have been moved by it personally. On behalf of the entire Juvenile Justice Initiative Board, Louise Klein, our director, thank you so much for being a part of this. Stay strong, everybody. Take care.